And we have our very first highlight of the evening, our conversation with Reiner. So let me stop sharing the screen so I can see you better. And I'll go through a short introduction, formal introduction of Reiner. So Dr. Reiner, I should say, has spent 20+ years working in tech across companies, big and small. During his career, he performed a variety of roles, including senior software engineer, director of engineering, assistant professor, VP of engineering, and chief technology officer. He has earned his PhD in computer science from the University of California, Santa Cruz. And he also has attained the title of Master Inventor due to his prolific work in inventing new technologies, having filed more than 120 patent applications over his career while working at companies like IBM and Yahoo. In 2003, MIT Technology Review named him as one of the top 100 innovators under 30. In 2016, Dr. Kraft left Silicon Valley for his native home in Germany to help scale the fast-growing fashion startup Zalando. So these days, Reiner is based in Berlin, Frankfurt, in Germany, where he runs an executive coaching business called The Mindful Leader, focusing on helping technical leaders deepen their skills and scale their organizations. On a personal note, Reiner, there are a number of things, actually. Number one, he bravely moved from Germany to the Silicon Valley at a young age, few contacts and even face some hardship doing his PhD while working full-time. He's a musician and has performed since being a kid, a teenager. So he plays the piano, and you can find him on Spotify if you really want. You can tell that he's a Star Wars fan with Yoda behind him, and he refers to Yoda every now and then on his articles. So he might talk about that perhaps tonight. And it's fascinating. The more research about Reiner, the more fascinated I was, from his very holistic approach. He's into biohacking, micronutrients, and the thing that connected us, really how I bumped into Reiner and we connected, was the fact that he wrote this article on LinkedIn. The first of 15 articles he wrote on LinkedIn about the 12 mindful leadership principles. And that was in March 2008, which is, interestingly enough, was just a few months away from the Mindful CIO Manifesto. So different part of the world, but similar message. So welcome, Reiner. Such an honor to have you here with us. So thanks so much for joining us this evening. So let's get started with a little bit of a brief overview of your career, how you came to where you are today, and your involvement with the Mindful Leader. So whatever you like to share in this opening section of the conversation.
So yeah, thanks, Ned, first for this introduction. It sounded really good. Listening, oh wow, cool, and sometimes hear it externally, some of the things, and also some of the topics that you picked out of it. Yeah, I think the reason I sit here is probably all those steps before from tech. Tech is still my, I would say, as a scientist, I like technology, I like numbers, and I like to see how the technology can evolve and can be useful for many of us. This is what I did at large scale while working at these companies like Yahoo or Zalando. But I also realized that at the end of the day, it all starts with the leader. And I had luck during my career that I worked for some really good mentors who helped me to grow as a leader, but I also worked for a few not so good leaders. And they were, yeah, these guys were just creating so much chaos in the environment, in the organization. So it's like creating this toxic work environment. I think this is a good analogy. And it was not fun being there, working in such an environment, not just for me, but for hundreds of others who were at that point in these in this environment. And it's not a like, oh yeah, this is rare thing just happened there. I think it's happening all over the place. And that motivated me to think about better ways of doing leadership. And when I 10 years ago personally got more and more into mindfulness, of course, why did I get into mindfulness? There was a reason, because I got into mental exhaustion. So, and this is nowadays, I know this is just happening to everyone who is in that space, not just necessarily in tech, but if you don't manage your mind and your body properly, it's just, and you're in a fast-paced environment with a lot of requirements on your mental capabilities. It's just a matter of when it happens, not if it happens. So right, it may take 5 years, maybe 10, but eventually you're on the hook. So that's my learnings out of this. And then the question was, and many of these leaders, they got into this, they were obviously stressed themselves. It's not that all that stuff they wanted to do was just they had this idea of being a poor leader. It's just at that point they couldn't do it differently. Their mind at that point, this was the limitation. So those things are realized. And then the question was, what can be done to improve leadership or help leaders to become better leaders? And that is not a straightforward answer for this. It was more or less like years and years of trial and error, looking at different methodologies. I mean, I went also to all kind of retreats, meditation, mindfulness exercises, but I also got deeper and deeper into neuroscience because I realized, yeah, it's good to be aware and notice what's happening in my mind. But how do I change it? How do I change the programming? And that was the analogy when I was talking about the mind as a piece of software that can be actually, usually it's not written well. There's a lot of bugs in there. It's complex. It's not running well. And so it can be optimized since it's software. So that was a big insight. And I focused then on developing what I now call mind management. It's just a term I used. It's also used in other contexts, but I used it to see there, to express there's some interest in upgrading the mind. And then finally, maybe the last point there was that I also realized my body was in bad shape because of all those, the way I was not mindful with my body over these many years. So all kind of problems, high blood pressure. I probably had 15 or 20 kilos extra on weight, right? I had anxiety stuff. I had, so pretty much arrhythmias, right? All the, like when you go to a doctor and you do these checkups, right? There's all those things coming back and they put you all on this medication. So this was the first time about 10 years ago when all of a sudden I had like 2 or 3 medications I had to take. Doctor said, oh yeah, this you take for here, this for the blood pressure, here for the heart, blah, blah, blah. I said, what? What is this? So I couldn't believe that, right? And this is what the doctor told me. And then I said, does it all make sense? And since I had not really a lot of background on the human body and what to do with it, but again, as a scientist, I got motivated to really get into this. And then when I moved to Berlin back in 2016, I got to know a few really good functional medicine doctors who first, I had the feeling they actually understood in terms of how the human body works, in terms of a system. Not from an anatomic level in terms of, oh yeah, we'll go here and fix this. That's not what I'm talking about. It was more like there's all those different systems which I never heard of. And so, oh wow, interesting, right? And then there were genetics, there were your genes. And all of a sudden I discovered epigenetics. I said, wow, this is all cool stuff. It's again software, right? It's Epigenetics is the software that runs on top of your genes. And so this fascinated me again. So I got deeper and deeper in exploring these areas as well. And the motivation was obviously here first to fix my own body. So at that point, I already had lost 15, 20 kilograms of weight. All markers in terms of blood pressure, all that stuff was gone. And of course, I had a head start and I got deeper and deeper in it. And then at some point, maybe 3-4 years ago, I thought, well, it's probably best at that point, after I had built up some large organizations at Zalando. I had about 400 people in my organization across Berlin, Dublin, and Helsinki. I did a startup afterwards for Deutsche Bank, which is also quite big here in terms of investments into startups and funding, basically fintech type of new innovative projects. But after that, I pretty much knew at this point I wanted to go more deeper into how to help leaders to take it to the next level. So this was the idea. And the three components are awareness. This is really the absolutely underlying component. And then there is the upgraded mind and the upgraded body. And what I realized, if I bring all these things together, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if I bring them together in a certain way, it's basically magic happens, right? All of a sudden, the body runs high performance, there's energy there, right? And with that energy, you can get more stuff done, so you can use it, particularly in our work environment. In tech, there's always extra energy is actually helpful. And focus on all that good stuff. And then awareness itself was the interesting piece, can also be cultivated in a very systematic way. And this is when I, at that point, defined this term high performance mindset to reflect the combination of awareness, upgraded mind and body. And that's what I'm currently really then working on, and basically helping these tech leaders to basically get a system on their journey, either with some coaching, with the program I build, or whatever ways. But I also work a little bit as a tech advisor, scientific advisor, so to keep still my connection into tech. But yeah, that's where I am now, right? And so I feel the journey has just started. There is more that can be done to really scale this. So I'm more in this now. How can more people benefit from this, basically?
Fascinating. Thanks, Reiner. So many areas I could go in there. One thing that I really love, and I think it's so interesting because you're very strong. You like me, you started it as a programmer. You have that very analytical mind. If I may say, that's my perception. A researcher, with a PhD, so that very inquisitive mind. But you went you went beyond just the mindfulness aspect, but also look into the need for the body to be actually supported. So the mind and body. So your holistic approach to the high performance mindset, actually looking into the need to fine tune the body as well, not just the mind. Mm-hmm. So one thing maybe that could be a nice segue, it's the 12 principles, and that's actually something that I shared with the participants today for discussion. That's one resource they will use as a conversation starter in the breakout rooms shortly. So I'm curious because you wrote in 2018. Kind of very close to when we wrote the manifesto, and it's such a beautiful article, with those 12 guidelines. And for everyone, if you go into the article, you can see underneath those 12 guidelines, there's a little bit of explanation on what they mean. And some of those can sound quite hard to achieve, I don't think I have here with me. I do like the number 6, do not get too attached to the outcome. That one can be really tricky, for a C-level, exec. Think, well, what do you mean? No outcome. That's what it's all about. But then you explain, what's the rationale behind, and also the expect nothing and accept anything. But just from, initial thoughts on what motivated you to write the 12 principles? How do you use that when you work with clients? What would you like to comment about that beautiful article?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm thinking back in these days. So at that point when I wrote it, I was working at Zalando, and I had that large tech organization. And I was looking around in terms of what guidance can I give these leaders? And I remember Zalando at this point, so it's a large e-commerce fashion company. There's more than 10, 15,000 employees, so it's huge. It's the biggest one in Europe around fashion, probably, right? I think Amazon obviously is also close when it comes to fashion, but not as big. But the guidance, what I was thinking about is, since Zalando had released some leadership principles, they were similar to Amazon's leadership principles, and Amazon has published these leadership principles for quite some time. And so I was looking at them, and at the first glance, this all looked good in terms of, yeah, sure, customer focused, whatever, or even customer obsessed, right? So there was stuff like things like these terms, but and that explained to me actually why this. So the question is, if there are these leadership principles out there, and if the employees and the leaders are actually living these principles, why is it still a toxic environment? And the reason is because there was a lack of mindfulness in the workspace. There was not enough presence. And that then for that reason, I figured, well, let's create actually some leadership principles that focus more on the underlying, on the root cause, not on all those little things on top that sound good. And that's when I started writing them. And it's basically staying present with everything you do, all your thought, action, and words. So this focus on presence, this was actually the one that I started with. I figured that's it. So I don't need 12 principles. I just need this one. So this number 12 didn't came up at this point. At this point, I had one, which was focus, be present with everything you do. But then I realized, well, they won't be able to do it. So I had a workshop organized. My leadership team, I had 35 leaders in there. And I presented, he said, hey, look, there's some draft, and I'm looking at this stuff here and get some feedback, insights. And so I shared, at this point, it still was not 12. I think it was probably a bag of 10 of these principles. They looked at them and they all said, oh yeah, this looks kind of cool. Makes sense. And they all understood it. And the feedback was very positive. And so, strange. So I expected some pushback or some deeper discussion, but no, it was all great. So they pretty much said, "Oh yeah, cool," and yeah, I'll give it a try. And so many of them, they said, "Oh yeah, this is something to experiment with." But then, yeah, they couldn't really implement it. So a few weeks later, I met with a few of my direct reports and said, "So, oh, by the way, how's this leadership thing going with these principles?" And usually I heard, not so good. I couldn't really follow through. This didn't work out, and this and this. And so at the end, it didn't work out. And then I realized, why is it the case? Because they know what to do and they're not that complicated, but there was simply a lack of presence. So they did not have enough presence in their life to really follow through with this. And that was then the question where I, first of all, of course, I figured, well, how can I still simplify this a little bit or make this more tangible for these leaders so that they have at least a little bit, they can get a few nuggets out there, so to speak, that helps them, like the one with the outcome. This was a classical thing I observed over and over again. And so then I came up with more of these examples, and this is how then eventually these 12 principles came together, in the sense that I said, well, if you're really fully present with all your words, thought, and actions, then let's give a few examples what that means, so they have a little bit of inspiration that is more concrete. And I think that was quite helpful. Of course, they still couldn't do it. That was the outcome. But then there were a few, I think usually it is the case, there were a few individuals in the organization, they really made it an effort. And these are usually the ones who are in some form or shape of suffering. And so suffering is here the best friend. The more suffering, that's my experience, the better it works for people to actually get into this and actually do some effort. Because there is no magic there. It's just basically becoming more present. Is for a normal person requires some work, some prioritization, making it a priority. Of course, there's other people, they wake up and all of a sudden, there it is, present is there. So there's a few of these on the planet as well. But for the more regular person, it is some work, right? It requires awareness to actually become aware that you're not aware, and that you actually start doing a little bit of what can I do to cultivate a little bit more awareness. So, and that's where I then left it off with these principles, is that even over those years, they haven't changed. I think this is still, everything holds, they're still very relevant. And people discover them over the years as well, and they use it now for guidance, because the cool thing is you can put other principles like leadership principles on top to make sure that these leadership principles then are more rooted in something more, rooted in presence, so that they're not getting in a direction that could become quite toxic. And this was my realization later when I wrote this article about Amazon, because there was toxic work environments despite all those principles and all that stuff. So that's my story around the leadership principles. Yeah.
Thanks, Reiner. And just your comment on suffering, that I think can be odd for people sometimes. I saw in one of the articles you mentioned that hate leads to suffering, and the Yoda comment on Empire Strikes Back. But yeah, suffering sometimes can be a really good friend, leads to reflection and lead to transformation and change. I get it. And the Amazon principles. So for everyone here, Reiner has another article talking about Amazon principles and the ego, the role of the ego in the context of leadership as well, and how that can influence culture in a not so positive way. Again, unfortunately, we don't have enough time. There are so many things I'd like to explore, Reiner. Perhaps before we close, I think for those here present that are about to go into the breakout room discussions, and for those who watch the recording as well, what would be your piece of advice for someone who is listening to you, understand, from a high level what you're saying, but would like to make a start in terms of developing, the high performance mindset and being more aware as a leader for their own benefit, for their own sanity as a leader, and for the benefit of those that they lead? What would be your 1 to 3 max succinct piece of advice? What would you say? What do you want the spot?
That's a good one. Yeah, I think first of all, I mean, I mentioned before, there is no magic bullet or anything that takes like ABC. No, I think the first step is becoming more aware, and this is what you're already doing, because you basically participate in this meeting here, and this meeting is also about raising awareness and being present. And so I think this is great. And then there's obviously lots of different activities, meditation, breathing exercises, and all that stuff. Whatever works for you to continue that path. So explore the path further, see where it leads is one thing. The second thing is obviously then what I mentioned about the software, the mind, to start more debugging your mind in a more systematic way. I think it's important to really understand what kind of thoughts are buried there in your subconscious mind, bring them to the surface and start really looking at them with your awareness. And that can have a big impact. And then the third one is actually start taking good care of your body. Maybe you're doing something that is already, you read something here or there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of conflicting advice out there when it comes to how to actually live healthy. It's unfortunate. But there is ways, once you use your awareness also to sense into the body when you do certain things. Do they feel good? Do they help? And when you work with the body, you will have to do some measurements. That means working with a functional medicine practitioner. Ideally, there is measurements done. So start using these measurements to help you get you from A to B. Without measurements, it's not working. That's my experience. And then even if you want to take it further, start to apply it also to your mind. You can measure the mind as well. And go into really more systematic approach if you're really up for it, right? But those are the things, basically awareness, mind, body, and just do little things every day. And if at the end of the day, maybe this is how I conclude, if at the end of your day, you did in all of these three aspects a little bit more from the good stuff, then you made some progress, right? So I think that's it, little things every day. And usually these add up quickly. So that's, I can say from my own experience, if you know what you're doing, if I could now teleport back 10 years ago and could use this knowledge and apply it, I probably would be in good shape in maybe 3 months instead of many years, right? But yeah, trial and error and doing every day a little bit more positive than negative to the body and to the mind.
Gold, gold. Thanks so much, Reiner. For everyone, if you look him up on LinkedIn, on his website, themindfulleader.net, there are literally tons and tons of information, really good stuff. I was doing my research for our conversation. I couldn't go through all the material, lots of good, really cool videos on his YouTube channel. Reiner has a podcast as well. Highly recommend you to have a look. Again, Reiner, thank you so much for your time. I don't know if you will be able to hang out with us, but if you are, so one group will be lucky to have you in the breakout room discussion. That would be wonderful if you can afford, but if you need to dash off, that's fine as well. Okay. Any final words, Reiner, before we move on? Any final thoughts or final comments that you'd like to share with the group before we move on?
No, I think thanks for organizing this event. I mean, in the series, I also did some research and seen it's nicely evolving, so that's great. Also feels there's good energy here. I will stick around probably for another 15 or so minutes until our time. It's 12 noon, so I think in your case it's 8, right? So I'll stick around for another 15 minutes in the breakouts, and then unfortunately I have to leave as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Very generous. Okay, so